And let's see here, I'm gonna try to share my screen now. Okay, yeah. There we go. Okay. Let's see if this goes right. Can everybody see that? Let me double check my settings here real quick. You know what? I'll have to find out if the audio comes through a little bit later. I'll just ask you guys about it. But hopefully you can see this okay. So anyway, thanks again for having me over here and to talk about this. We're going to be talking about something that's actually outside the the spectrum of ham radio a little bit, but well within all of our grasp. I mean, the equipment we use and just kind of a different way of using our spectrum than we normally do. And you'll have to forgive me a little bit. I didn't get a great sleep last night, and then today I did a soda activation and was almost chased away by rain. So I'm a little tired. So when we think about software-defined radios, a lot of us think about things like, HF transceivers, like the 7300 or the K4, which, by the way, if you have a drawing for one of those, I'd like to put in my name, please. And things like the new Yaesu rigs, all of these employ software-defined radio technology. Even the little G90 that it seems like everybody has, they use SDR technology. But what we'll be talking about today really are the little black box SDRs. This is one I really like called the SDR Play RSPDX. I think you can buy it for around about $180. These are manufactured in the UK by the company SDR Play, but there are a lot of other software-defined radios out there. But the ones that I'm most interested in for spectrum archiving, which I'll tell you about, are the little black boxes you connect to your PC and connect to an antenna, and all that they can offer you. So when we look at a transceiver and we have a spectrum display and a waterfall display on it, we're used to seeing like usually a little small chunk. It's not a whole lot. It's kind of designed to work around the amateur radio bands, which are much narrower. But little black box SDRs that you hook up to your PC can have a working bandwidth of anywhere from maybe 900 kilohertz to 20 megahertz, where you can see all of that at once. And it's really useful in the sort of things that I do. So basically in 2017, I was invited to speak on a panel at the Radio Preservation Task Force meeting at the Library of Congress. And it was a real honor for me to speak there. I'm not an academic. I don't work in media archiving or for any big broadcasters or anything. But they gave me an opportunity to talk about something that's really near and dear to my heart, which is for the preservation of radio spectrum. I'm not even convinced that when I got there, they really knew what I was talking about. And this is a picture of me. I took this photo right before we started our session at the Library of Congress. And those guys up there with me are some of the who's who in media archiving. There were people there from all the major public broadcasters like PBS and NPR, WGBH. There were commercial representatives there from like ABC, NBC. There were the Wikimedia Foundation, the Internet Archive, groups like that that are out there working every day to preserve radio history, sort of in all of its forms. And all of these people, though, mind you, they're not amateur radio operators. And I asked them in advance, do you know what radio spectrum is, or do you know what a spectrum recording is? And I asked them to raise their hands, and probably out of 150 people in that particular room, only one person raised their hand, and it was my buddy David Gorin, who's in the Spectrum Archive team with me. So really no one had a clue what it was. And the way I demonstrated it, because I was trying to think to myself, like, these I can't talk to them about SDR technology and receivers. A lot of these people, even though they work in radio history and that sort of thing, they are, they're not engineers, and this is kind of outside their realm. They think of radio as something that, comes through the internet or through their, car or something. So what I did was I showed them this image, and those of you who use software-defined radio applications probably know this one. It's HDSDR. It's been around a really long time. And I kind of pointed out to them that, you have spectrum that shows up down here. And this is like looking at a radio dial with a frequency readout. And the spectrum, these are all stations that are on the AM broadcast band. And up here, this is a waterfall, and that shows you how those signals change over time. And you can see the history of those signals in a way. And I thought since they're into history and archiving, I would bring up a recording that's one of our oldest recordings. Most of the recordings are not terribly old because they came around the time that third generation SDRs started landing in people's homes, which was around 2008 or so. Most people started getting those, and they became affordable for sort of consumers and enthusiasts. I'm sure they've been, in government agencies a really long time before that, but they became affordable and accessible. But this one was actually recorded in Providence, Rhode Island. This is a recording from Providence, Rhode Island in 1986. I think it was May 5th, 1986. And it wasn't made with an SDR, it was made with a hi-fi VCR that a fellow basically hooked up to his receiver and basically recorded, I guess, the IF off of it, and then played it back through his radio. But anyway, he digitized this for us off of that old hi-fi VCR recording, and I was able to play it. So I'm hoping when I start this up, you'll be able to hear the audio, and I may have to have someone tell me if it's working or not on your end. This is a video, and I narrate in this video, so I won't talk over it. So I'm gonna give this a go here.
From Logan, Green, and Amtrak.
So what you're listening to is actually the AM broadcast band recorded in Providence, Rhode Island, May 1st, 1986, starting around 7:59 UTC, which is roughly around 4 o'clock AM. So the news is about to start at the top of the hour.
NBC News, I'm Kevin Gordon. President Reagan himself says, even with the vast resources available to the United States, there is no way of knowing just how bad the Chernobyl nuclear plant disaster really is. The accident is the talk of the Western world. There are still vast portions of the Soviet Union that have no idea that anything is wrong. Stuart Neubart at Stanford University says the only people in the Soviet Union who were told about Chernobyl are Moscow and Kiev.
We've been monitoring these broadcasts since Tuesday, and there's been absolutely no mention of anything connected to a nuclear accident. The Siberian people don't know anything about it.
The fire is said to still be burning out of control, with the fire having spread to the second reactor of the plant. There are some reports.
So it's not just one recording that we have here, not just of this one broadcaster, but everything that was on the AM broadcast band that day. So I'll just tune to it, like as if I were tuning live radio.
Live from the Kennedy Space Center this evening. It's the first launch there since the Challenger space shuttle explosion. One Challenger investigator says examination of wreckage proves a rocket joint failed, again pointing to a problem with the O-rings. Los Angeles Library officials are not.
We'll speed up the rate.
So actually, I think you probably get an idea of what that's like there. And it's, the amazing thing about that particular recording, and it is, like I said, it was made on a hi-fi VCR. If you're used to looking at spectrum on your transceiver or anywhere else, you used to see like, nice straight AM carriers. These are all wobbly and everything because it was recorded on magnetic tape. And that tape at the time that he digitized it was probably already I don't know, it was probably 23 years old or something by the time he had done that. So anyway, or in fact, it was probably much older than that. I'm not sure what year he did it. It may have been as early as 2008, or it may have been 2018. But he didn't, Mark Connolly did that back in 1986, and he didn't do it because of the news of the day, even though I was really shocked when I listened to this the very first time, because it was all the information about Chernobyl, which had only happened, 5 days beforehand. And, we're starting to go back into using our space shuttles again after the Challenger incident. And a lot of the broadcasters that were on there no longer exist. I was able to go through there and listen to them and check out their call signs. Mark actually intentionally started the recording 1 minute before the top of the hour because he's a medium wave DXer. He likes to try to find transatlantic stations by recording the top of the hour where people have IDs. And anyway, like in the world of radio, I know a little bit about software-defined radios because I do run this blog, the SW Welling Post, and I do a lot of equipment reviews of various sorts and stuff. I'm not an engineer. I do it more from a user standpoint, but I'm kind of in the middle of a lot of communications back and forth. I've got about 9,000 daily readers on that site. And so I get a lot of email and people send me tips about new equipment and that sort of thing. And I work with manufacturers. I sometimes help them beta test stuff and do evaluations. And so I get to play with all these, really cool SDRs. But when I first got into the SDRs, the first thing I thought about was like, wow, I can make audio recordings with these really easily. So with broadcasters that were out there, I could just tune to a broadcaster, press record, and save it. And that brought around the shortwave radio audio archive, which has thousands, or I'd say like over 1,000 off-air recordings. So these recordings are, as they said at the very beginning, go back to about the 1950s, some of them. And most of them were made by hams and enthusiasts and shortwave radio listeners that just recorded it from home. And that's actually what we like, is the off-air kind of air check recordings. We do have studio recordings and we have some other interesting ones in there, but I'd say that 97% of all the recordings were made at home. And some people make them with SDRs today and we upload them. Some of them were made with reel-to-reel tape and even earlier devices. And I have a thing for archiving stuff, and I blame it on back when I did my undergraduate studies. I didn't study archiving or anything, but I worked in an archives department as a student at my university for probably 4 years, about the whole time I was at the university. That was my one of my many jobs I did while I worked through college. And I loved it. And I saw people, would come to the archives department to find original material for research they were doing. And I always enjoyed helping them find that. And so I just have a natural tendency to want to archive things. So now let's talk a little bit more about radio time travel. And it requires basically not a traditional radio. It requires a software-defined radio. And I'm sure that a lot of you here have used those by now. If not, I will just say it's basically radio hardware plus software, and you get a software-defined radio. So it's a little less like this. That is, by the way, the RF-2200, which is an amazing AM broadcast band receiver. It's one of my favorite portables ever, but very much analog. It's a little bit more like something you would have, on your cell phone. But really, it's a piece of hardware plus a piece of software and your computer or some kind of computing device. And it kind of makes up more than the sum of its parts. And what I really like is about SDRs is it makes spectrum and radio broadcast, radio signals accessible to pretty much anyone. And that's where we'll kind of dive a little deeper into this. So, for ages with analog dials or with, digital frequency readouts on traditional kind of legacy radios, we would tune to a frequency and we could hear things either 5 kilohertz above or below or together, we may be able to hear something with, in AM that's 15 kilohertz wide maybe, but we really were kind of stuck with one signal or the signals that are right up against it. And we tuned around, and it was sort of like having blinders on compared to what you can do with a software defined radio, because you can open it up, and SDRs in the early days would have a working bandwidth less than 1 megahertz, which was pretty amazing back then. Now they make SDRs with 20 megahertz working bandwidths. And that means that SDR is sucking in all of those signals all at once, and you can see them, you can manipulate them, you can do anything you want to them. And it makes the spectrum visible. So, in the ham radio world, what I really like about SDRs is, and I encourage everybody, if you don't have an SDR, get even an inexpensive one and maybe make it a pan adapter for your radio. And you can use your regular old knobs and buttons radio, and on a computer screen, you can see your spectrum there, because if you're chasing DX, like that's working split, you can see where the pileup is and where the operator is on the spectrum, and it saves you a little bit of time instead of hunting around for them. But it basically shows you, it doesn't confine you to one, frequency at a time. And but back to the time machine part. So if you want to make a radio time machine, you need a few components. And one of them is a computer, of course. You need an SDR application, so a piece of software running on that computer. And you need an SDR, a software defined radio. A computer can really be pretty much anything. It can be a desktop, it can be a laptop, it can be a tablet running Android or Windows, and even iOS has some. It can even be a little Raspberry Pi computer, because they're powerful enough to run a lot of SDR applications, especially the latest versions of them. And you need an SDR application. And this is a really important part, because this actually does unlock everything. And some of the very best SDR applications on the market are totally free. And I showed you, we used HD SDR to play back this recording that was made with a hi-fi VCR. And that's a great, simple SDR application. There's also SDR Sharp, SDR Console, and this is by no means a complete list. There are some for Mac and Linux. There are less of them for Mac and Linux OSs than there are for Windows. And then a lot of times when you buy an SDR, it'll come with its own application. Because manufacturers like to really unlock what a receiver can do by their design by using their own application. For example, this is SDR Uno that ships with SDR Play radios. And this is one they have that has a dual tuner in it that actually does diversity reception. So you can see it's almost like having two SDRs running at the same time. But basically the components are always the same with an SDR. You have a frequency display, you have all your controls for filters and modes and bands and frequency entry, you have spectrum, and you have waterfall. And then just other receiver controls. But once you've messed with a few of them, you can float around between different SDR applications and kind of decide what you like best. You also need an SDR, and these are really not very expensive anymore. When I first got into SDRs, to get a really nice one, you're going to spend $1,000. I actually worked with some early SDRs that used audio patch cables to your computer, and was really put off by them because I found that their performance wasn't that great. I didn't feel like it really gave me much. But when what they would call third generation SDRs came around, where you have basically a USB cable that connects the box to your computer, that really opened the door, because there was a lot less noise. It was a lot cleaner audio and higher definition spectrum that they made. But you can get in as cheap as $25. In fact, a lot less. I have a friend that bought an RTL SDR dongle for $9 at Hamvention one year. A guy was selling them. You can buy them very inexpensively, or you could pay up to $2,400 if you want to. I mean, there's really a lot in there. But frankly, when you're putting money into an SDR, you're putting money into the hardware itself, not really the application. The applications do a lot, but of course, if you have junk coming in, you have junk coming out. And RTL SDR dongles are really cool, but I wouldn't recommend them as a pan adapter. They're just not that great on HF, and you need to put a bunch of filters in front of them and stuff to make them work well. I would recommend something like the RSP1A that's about $100. That one covers all the way down to, like, I don't know, just a few kilohertz up to 2 gigahertz, very wide band. And if you like HF stuff only or primarily, AirSpy makes some incredible SDRs, like the HF Plus Discovery, which I don't have on this list, but it's I think it's about $160 to $180, and it's an amazing SDR. And so, yeah, there are a whole bunch of different types of SDRs out there, from the really cheap ones to affordable ones. And, you know, like I said, when you invest in a really good piece of hardware with your SDR, it'll last. This Perseus, Microtelecom Perseus, I was just talking to somebody recently, people in the shortwave listening and receiver DXing world still use this thing because it is just bulletproof. And I know that Rob Sherwood, I think, has like 2 of these and uses them as test equipment. They're so good. And you know, when you buy a good piece of hardware, it's not going to become outdated. In fact, people usually just improve the software applications for them. This is a Titan SDR, which I reviewed and I still kind of help evaluate updates on, made by a company in Italy. It's the $2,400 receiver, and it's really designed to independently monitor 64 different frequencies simultaneously, and feed that into a decoding machine, because these are used for military purposes, basically. And then, you know, the really cool thing I like about SDRs too is I think they've kind of democratized using the spectrum, because all of a sudden you can do all these really cool things with them. This is one that I use as an ADS-B receiver. And I have probably $80 in that whole setup. And it's running right now and has been running for maybe 3 or 4 years really well. So it picks up ADS-B information off of aircraft as they fly overhead and feeds that into the FlightAware network. So a lot of things you can do with SDRs. But anyway, the thing I'm most interested in is spectrum. And really, I feel like spectrum recordings really are time travel, because they are time shifted recordings. You're not listening to just one audio channel. You are able to tune through it and listen to, you know, the static in between the channels if you want to, depending on how wide your recording is. SDRs make spectrum recordings, but SDR applications can read spectrum recordings. And with our project, we are trying to make that reading part more accessible to everyone, so that you don't have to be a ham or a radio enthusiast to understand how to use an SDR and load up one of the recordings in it. So if you may wonder, like, what's so special about them? Well, in my world, I don't know how many of you are shortwave radio listeners, but you know, it's sort of a sunsetting media technology. Most of the big broadcasters have really either downsized their offerings on shortwave or have gotten rid of them altogether. There's still a lot of things to listen to, don't get me wrong, but it's not like the Cold War days where we had so many on there. And there are a lot of lost signals. And actually, I've been making spectrum recordings since 2011 myself. And I keep finding that in my recordings, I go back and I'll listen around and I'll find one that maybe I didn't tag as well as I did my other ones. I try to do a pretty good job indexing my stuff, but I'll find some that are kind of stranded. And I found this one, and it was centered on 9580. So I knew exactly what that was going to be when I played it. But Radio Australia used to come on 9580 kilohertz. And in North America, you could hear it when you couldn't hear anything else. I mean, it just boomed into North America. And here's sort of a recording that I pulled off. This is from one of my spectrum recordings. That day, there was nothing else on the air. You can just see the waterfall was completely dead.
Given you fairy tales, you know, those stories where even if everything,
that's when they came on the air.
At the end of the day, we always end up with a smile on our face, and maybe
probably a minute or two before the start of the hour.
Students or Bluebirds, and Sound and Vision with Lance Sinclair is going to take a look at Dark Disney, those films which really ended the fairy tale.
But the thing that kind of amazed me about it was how Radio Australia went off the air in January 2017, and I actually have some of the very final recordings that people in our team got together and actually from around the world made Spectrum recordings. So we would actually have that. They were such a big deal and one of my staple broadcasters. Here's another, and I won't play this for very long here, but this is a 25 meter band scan that I made in August 22nd, 2016. This was just a day that we had pretty good propagation. And you can see here on the band, you can look at the waterfall. This is with a Win Radio Excalibur, which was my first SDR and still one of my favorites. I'll just play just a little bit of this, like a minute or so. This was just one I really picked out at random.
Hello, this is Bob Zanotti, formerly of Swiss Radio International, now SwitzerlandandSound.com in Bern, Switzerland. And you're listening to WRMI, Radio Miami WRMI.net. Send us your comments and reception reports to
See, that station's about to go off the air. You can tell when the audio drops and then the carrier drops. Sorry, it's a little loud. That's an interval signal. Any of you who've been listening to shortwave radio for a long time know what that's like. That's a little ditty they play before a broadcaster comes on the air, and a lot of broadcasters still do that.
Number station.
Yes, it's a number station. That's the Spanish number station, HM01, Hotel Mike 01. And they're one of the very few number stations left on the air. But I remember as a kid with my Zenith Transoceanic, it was like number stations were everywhere back in the Cold War. And I had no idea. I mean, at the time I was like, what is all this stuff? And it wasn't really until the age of the internet that I was able to figure out, like, oh yeah, that was actually used for operatives in other countries to send messages covertly. Wow, cool. People try to decode those, but you really can't do it because they're made with one-time pads. When we are able to code them, and especially with this particular number station, actually, which also sends out a digital bursts, and you can copy the digital stuff as well. But when we capture someone and get their pad before they've destroyed it, then we're able to go in and actually listen and decode some of the messages that come through. But so I mentioned the things that we need for a time machine, but really one of the important things is a digital storage space. Like our laptops and tablets and things usually have hard drives and SSDs and things in them, but Spectrum recordings take up a lot of space. Since 2011, every presidential and midterm election, I've recorded the entire AM broadcast band from North Carolina. And I've done it because the archivist in me knows that that's going to be a moment in history that someone in the future may care to listen to. And when I make those recordings, it eats up at least 2 gigabytes of space every minute. So this last presidential election, of course, it lasted like, several days as results were rolling in. I had to really curate what I was recording, and I tried to go back. I'd record everything, then I'd go back and take out tons of recordings of just kind of the space where nothing was happening. I still ended up with 2 terabytes of data on my hard drive. So these make really large recordings, and you need some storage space for them. So that is actually one of our challenges with the Spectrum Archive is we've reached this point in technology where we can make Spectrum recordings and make really good ones. But storing them is getting cheaper all the time. Bandwidth is getting better all the time, but it's still really expensive right now. And probably 10 years from now, it'll be way more accessible. But like for me right now, it's really an impossibility for me at home to upload Spectrum recordings because they're just too large. It'd take forever on my internet connection. there are also multiple file formats and standards. So if you, on an SDR application, when you hit record and you tell it to record spectrum, some applications allow you to tell how wide you want the spectrum to be. They'll let you change your sample rates. They'll let you change a lot of things. Well, and then they have their own file format for storing metadata and all those other things. And that can get kind of confusing when you have a bunch of those. So that's one of our challenges, is the so many formats that are out there. Also file integrity over the long term, because you're dealing with hard drives and things like that. They wear out, and they're not archival quality, unfortunately. And then we need applications that can suck in all these different formats and play them back. And if we want to share them on using the cloud or whatever you want to call it, it's incredibly expensive. I've had people tell me before, like, you know, you're just looking at this the wrong way. You just need a good Dropbox account. But when you have, you know, I don't know, 2 gigabytes or maybe even 50 gigabytes of stuff you're storing on Dropbox or Google Drive or one of those other things, that's not a big deal. It's not too expensive. But when you have something, you know, 2 or 10 or 12 or 15 terabytes of information and multiple people are downloading it, it costs a lot of money. It's very expensive. You really can't do it for less than several $1,000s a year. And that's usually with a very limited group of people doing the downloads. So that's something that we always, you know, kind of have to consider when we're doing this. But to kind of put all this together, a few years ago, I created the Radio Spectrum Archive, and it's really a team of people. It's not a nonprofit organization. We are all volunteers. We just kind of get together and we try to make an effort to save important spectrum recordings. So a lot of us have made recordings from everything from the AM broadcast band to the FM band to openings in shortwave radio when we've had really good propagation. Some people record contests, bits of contest on the ham radio bands. Some people record the aviation bands. I mean, just everything, anything that's RF. We have some of those in the Spectrum Archive, and it's kind of spread out over the world. We have contributors from several in the United States, and Australia, and New Zealand, Japan, Russia, the Czech Republic, I mean, just India and Sri Lanka, all over the place. And a lot of us are doing what I do, is we store these at home, because right now there's no central place that we can easily upload them to. And so I see a day when I hope that maybe spectrum recordings could be in a museum. And I think it'd be so cool, personally, because I'm a massive World War II history buff. I would love to be able to go to a kiosk in a museum and tune through what it sounded like on the radio bands, you know, maybe the day that Pearl Harbor was attacked, or Victory over Europe Day, or whatever. You could tune through and hear how the news rolled in, sort of in real time. Of course, we didn't have that technology back then. We can't do that. We just have audio recordings. But starting now, we do have all that. And so we can go back, and if we've made a recording, we can go back and play it. And so I like the idea that it could be used in a museum. And of course, in academia, I can see people using it for research. Historians, media specialists, anthropologists can all use source material. And I've often said, I actually did my graduate studies at the London School of Economics in anthropology. It's actually in social anthropology, of all things. And I did it to kind of do it. I knew it wasn't a career move. I was working in applications development for a fiber optics company, but I did that. And I did it because I love culture and learning about it, and I love history. And I often wanted to go into the realm of broadcast history and that sort of thing. And having Spectrum Archives would have been really important, doing original research and that sort of thing. Also, I don't know if anybody would recognize this, but this is Radio Canada International used to have a transmitting station in Sackville, New Brunswick. And that right there is one of their curtain antennas that they used for their North Quebec service. And they use it for other things as well. And it was amazing. And I was standing on the transmitter building of Radio Canada International when I took that picture in June of 2016. By the end of that year, those towers were down and gone. And so I love having spectrum recordings because I can go back to actually I said 2016, this was in 2012 that this happened. I can go back to 2012 and I have recordings of Radio Canada International on the air. And of course, when I knew they were going to go away, I made recordings specifically so that I could listen to them later. And my buddy David said that spectrum recordings are a little bit like kind of like having a fine wine in your cellar. So I'll often make recordings, like if I go on vacation or I go to some interesting place, I'll make a spectrum recording and go back later. And like when it's maybe there's a storm outside or something and I have my antennas disconnected, I can actually pull up one of these recordings and be swept back to some outing I did in Finland or in Belize or someplace where I made a recording. And so it's like having a fine wine that you can pull out of the cellar and open up. So that's sort of another motivation. One of the really cool things that came out of the Library of Congress meeting, besides some journal articles that were written about the Spectrum Archive, because these people, like these were all academics, and I told you that they, no one knew what a spectrum recording was. And after I finished that video of the playback from that 1986 recording that I struggled with here, I asked him, I said, who knows what a spectrum recording is now? And everybody raised their hand. And I got like a standing ovation after that, because to these people, it's not because of my delivery. It was because they're not in the world of, the radio enthusiasts. They don't know about this technology. To them, this was something just from like outer space. Like they had never seen anything like this before, ever. And so it got a lot of attention that year, and which was my intent. I really just wanted it to get attention so people knew about it and knew that it was something important to preserve. And folks from the Internet Archive actually approached me and said, we'll take care of all your recordings, just send them to us and we'll share them and everything. And so we've been uploading recordings to the Internet Archive, and it's wonderful. It's a great storage place. It's safe. It's one of the biggest archival digital archivists in the world. They're just amazing. But the truth is, it takes a while to download their stuff, and it takes a while to upload it because they're not Amazon or Google or one of those big places. They have limited amount of server space. Well, not space so much, but bandwidth and everything. So you can get those uploaded, but it takes a while to do it. So these actually take, days sometimes to upload. And again, I can't do that from home. I usually have to do uploads when I'm at a place with really good bandwidth. And I'm planning, after all the COVID stuff's completely over, I'm planning to just take a bunch of hard drives to San Francisco and try to just dump them in their system all at once. But they were very kind to do that and jump on it and help us. So you will be able to download these things in the future. Anyway, yeah, the one thing that when I show you this is SDR Sharp, which is an application. Right now, if you download a file, you have to also download an application to run that file. And because the files have different formats, you really need to get the right one for the right file, which we try to document. We look forward today, though, where we have a web interface. And I don't know how many of you know this particular web SDR, but the University of Twente in the Netherlands has had a web SDR up for ages. And it's an HF SDR that hundreds of people can hop on at the same time. In fact, the day that I took this screenshot, there were 407 people listening to it all at once, independently of each other. And I've used it before just to see if my signal was making it into Europe, when I was calling CQ or something. It runs in a web browser. It's very simple and it works really well. We would like a place where you could pull up a recording and then just use a web application to run the recording. So you wouldn't need to download the recording and you wouldn't need to download an application. And it'd be easy enough that pretty much anybody could learn to use it. That's sort of our goal. So anyway, that's pretty much the end of it. I do want to show you one really quick sort of demonstration if I can. I don't know if this will require everything working right. but I'm going to go in here and try to do this while I've still got the screen here, and then I'll be happy to answer any questions if you got them. So that recording that I did early on, this is actually a demo of that recording working through a web interface on the guy who runs the web SDR at the University of Twente in the Netherlands. He actually put this on a machine. This is like sitting in a PC on his desk. So this is not a URL everybody can go to. It would probably crash it. But this is the actual recording running through a web application. And so you can click here.
Soviet officials are reported to have asked Sweden if Stockholm's Karolinska Hospital is prepared to receive people.
And you can annotate it. So you can put in what stations are there. So I can click here. And you can actually go in, so I can actually hop in here and zoom in and see these, and let me just find something like maybe here. And like that's a weak signal, it's not coming in very well, but I can turn on AM sync and try to lock onto it. So I can kind of DX it a bit. I can change the filter. And that's sort of what's possible. This is what we'd like to do in the future, but of course this is server space. This is a lot of things happening to make this work. And so we'll just have to see when we can make that work. But anyway, actually this is the FlightAware thing that I had running with the RTL SDR dongle that's up here on the screen. Anyway, does anyone have any questions? I've been talking a whole lot. And I don't know how to switch everybody over to where I can hear them or anything, so I'll let whoever's in charge do that.
Okay, thanks. We're going to see if we can do this without too much echo.
You know what I'm going to do is,
but thanks very much, Thomas. We appreciate that. You just stop sharing your screen, and I think that will clear out then you'll be able to see everybody here that has any questions. And I just want to say thank you so much for joining us this evening and for your archive. The question I think I have is, I was on your site where I saw, I downloaded the HDSDR, and I went to your site and looked at some databases that you have as samples.
Yeah.
But I wasn't able to get the two connecting. Is that just the download time? I need to be more patient in downloading.
Yeah, I mean, I can't remember how large those files are that we put out there. We tried to find actually some of the oldest ones, because of course we want to share those. We want those to be in multiple places all at once. And they're probably they could be as much as a gigabyte each or so. So make sure that they go down. And then with HDSDR, you have to put it in the mode to tell it that it's not looking for a receiver, it's looking for a file, you know. Sometimes that can take, you know, a little finagling to make it work. And every SDR application is a little different, but HDSDR is probably one of the best for picking up different file formats and using them.
Okay, very good. Thanks very much. And let's see, we want to remember in our newsletter, we want to talk about your SWL archives and your SWL website podcast. Is there anything we can do to help with your archiving, building the archive? Is there a funding system?
So right now we just all fund it ourselves. What we really like, you know, like some of the things we really need are expertise. Sometimes we will eventually probably be at a stage where we'll do something like a GoFundMe or something for an online space where we can have a web SDR like I was just showing you, where people can just log in and instantly have access to everything. And we're probably going to try to do that in a really small way first with some of our bigger, you know, more historic recordings, and try to make that work. And by the way, I'm just now pulling up the chat stuff as well. And someone asked about the website. So the website for the Spectrum Archive is simply spectrumarchive.org. So if you just look up, it may be radiospectrumarchive.org. I almost need to look that up. I'm so used to just doing it with muscle memory from my fingers when I'm typing it in. I don't think about it. Also, the Shortwave Radio Audio Archive is shortwavearchive.com. And the SW Welling Post is, you can just type in swlingpost.com and it'll take you to that space as well. But yeah, those we kept those kind of separate because the Spectrum thing, it's a project that really will get universities interested in. The National Archives and the Library of Congress are very interested in it, but it's a tricky thing. And archivists, the thing that broadcast archivists struggle with more than anything else is copyright, because when we have a Spectrum recording and we're recording the FM broadcast band or the AM broadcast band or the shortwave broadcast band, there's going to be copywritten material in that. There's no way around that. Somewhere in that Spectrum recording, someone's got a music or something. And because of kind of being in a, I don't know what you call it, litigious society or whatever, where people are worried about being sued, universities are very risk averse, and any kind of digital archives are usually very risk averse. What we're trying to say when we do this is, this is not a place where people would take these and sell them. The recordings that are in here are not ones that people will turn into music and then sell that music. It's for history purposes, really. That is one of the other challenges I didn't really mention before.
Hey, Thomas, I wanted to mention those sites that you had on your thing there, the NA5B. I listened to that one, the Web SDR. And also, there used to be one out of Hungary. It's called SDR.HU. He had a very, but he, unfortunately, due to family circumstances and everything, I guess he went off the air. I don't know if you happen to see that one. That was interesting. The other thing too, I got this from, this is a great book. This is 275 pages. I got it from Amazon. I think it's like $29 or something. This thing, there is so much wealth of information there. It's just unbelievable. I don't know if you happen to see this one or not. I'm not pushing this guy's book. I'm just saying that it's available.
No, you should. You should. Carl is a really, really nice guy. He's a friend of mine, and he runs rtlsdr.com.
Oh,
and actually, the dongle that I use is the one that he kind of put together and sells to have kind of a higher grade RTL-SDR dongle. It has a better shielding and that sort of thing. But Carl's super nice and is definitely, he is the person that knows all of the things you can do with the RTL-SDR dongle. And yes.
When you talk to him, just tell him I really appreciate this book. And
I will do that.
And not only that, it is not going to be borrowed to anybody. It's mine. If I borrow it to somebody, I know I will not get it back. So all they got to do is go on Amazon. I think it's like I say, was it $29 or something? Boy, this is really great. A wealth of information here.
There are so many things you can do with that dongle. I have done everything from reading the inflation information from people's tire sensors as they drive past my house, or not past my house because I live up in the middle of nowhere, but drive past. I've done that before where I'd have it running, and as people would drive by, you'd see their tire sensor information. Could you use that for anything? Probably not, but it's just, there's so many things out there that you can see in the Spectrum, and it's just kind of fun. It kind of democratizes the Spectrum, that little dongle does. And you were talking about SDR.HU. So that was, I'm very familiar with that situation. That was a portal for the Kiwi SDR network. And people can go out, anybody can go out and buy a Kiwi SDR, which is an independent little SDR with a server. It's like I think it's a BeagleBone type processor. They're very inexpensive. I'd say they're probably less than $300 for the entire kit, but it's a good SDR. And you can actually hook it up at your house, connect it to the internet, and share your SDR with the rest of the world. And you can't do 400 something seats all at once, but most of them can do about 4. Some of them can do up to maybe 8 seats, and you can limit that as the owner. You can even limit it so that if someone turns it on and then moves away from it, it'll eventually time out. But it's actually a really exceptional SDR, and it doesn't have an application that you download per se. It runs in your web browser. So HDR or SDR or SDR.hu, it went away, but the Kiwi SDR network's still there, and there are other portals. In fact, there's some really good ones. So you would want to go to, I think it's rx.kiwisdr.com, I think is one of them, but you can look up Kiwi SDR map, and you'll find links to different ones. Like there's some that you can see all of the Kiwi SDR network, and there are probably 200 of them around the world now in some pretty remote places. And you can pull them all up at once and just click on one and go there. I was in, my wife and I and our kids will often go to Canada for a couple of months during the summer. And we stay up in Quebec or in the Maritimes. And I was up in Quebec, and not too far from the condo where we like to stay, there was like an arcing line on an HVL line nearby. And it just wiped out everything. I couldn't do anything from the condo. I got my iPad out and I pulled up that Kiwi SDR network, and it's like I can transport myself to a little lighthouse on the coast of Iceland. And I'm there with my headphones on, tuning that radio. And to me, that's just fascinating. And so it's a really cool network for sure.
I found his to be very interesting. Like I say, it was very sophisticated too, but unfortunately, what I think he just want to spend more time with his family or something. Is that why he went off?
It was a lot of upkeep, and it took server space and took money. And he did it more or less as a project, and it just really blossomed into something much bigger. But again, that whole network's still out there. You can still get to it. It's just not through that site.
Okay, yeah, thank you.
And somebody was saying that they really like their, Dave is saying that he likes his RSPDX, and that is it's a fantastic SDR. I really do love it as well. Okay, Steve, I'm not able to hear you. It is coming out like Mickey Mouse right now on my end.
Same here. Sounds like Alvin and the Chipmunks.
Yeah, more like chipmunks. I mean, that's the wonderful thing about Zoom, isn't it? I mean, I have to say, my girls, they're 13 years old, twins, and they use Zoom all the time, of course, to talk with their friends and meet with tutors and stuff online. And Zoom is such an amazing tool. It's great to be able to go to an amateur radio club meeting in Michigan and meet with people all over the world and stuff. But it can be frustrating at times too. It's when you're trying to do something live, it rarely works well.
Great. Thomas, I just want to say thank you again. I know you have other obligations that you need to take care of, and we're going to start wrapping up the meeting here and get our people home. But we thank you so much for taking the time to come and visit with us, and we look forward to your future success, and we'll look forward to sharing it with you, and look forward to checking in again maybe in another year, see how things are going.
Thank you so much for doing this and give me a chance to explain what I do here with the project. So, oh, wait. Okay, so let me just answer Steve's question here. What software is needed to record Spectrum? So really, any of the SDR applications can record Spectrum when they have an SDR connected to them. Some of my favorites that do that, SDR Sharp does it, SDR Uno, really all of the SDR consoles are a really powerful one. And it marries to a bunch of different SDRs. So check those out, mainly SDR console, SDR Sharp, and HD SDR. check out those, and those will work for you. But again, thank you so much. Let me talk about this. I'm a kind of nerd about it, so I will go on about it a long time. You guys thanks for inviting me out, and have a great rest of your evening.
Great.
Thank you.
And
Thanks a lot, Tom.
Thank you.
Thanks, Thomas.
There you go.